Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Ottoman Encounters interview series. My name is Doğa, and I'm the historian behind the online platform Ottoman Encounters, where my goal is to make Ottoman and Middle Eastern history more accessible to a general audience. My guest today is Jane Hathaway, and we're going to be talking about her new book, Ottoman-Era Documents from the Cairo Genizah. Jane is one of the leading historians of the Ottoman Egypt, and she has recently retired from the Ohio State University. She's the author of many excellent works, including, but not limited to, The Politics of Household in Ottoman Egypt, The Rise of Khazdalas, The Arab Lands Under Ottoman Rule, and The Chief Eunuch of the Ottoman Harem, from African Slave to Power Broker. This book, Ottoman-Era Documents from the Cairo Genizah, is her latest book, and it's open source. It's published open source, and anyone can read it for free. On a more personal note, I had the pleasure of working with Jane while I was doing my PhD at the Ohio State University, and for that reason, I will be referring to her as Hocam throughout the conversation, which means my teacher in Turkish. And although we have been in contact over the years, I haven't actually seen her since I finished my PhD. So I'm very much looking forward to this conversation myself. Hocam, welcome, and thank you very much for being here.
You're welcome, and I'm very happy to see you as well, Doğa.
Thank you very much. Hocam, so let's start from the very beginning. So can you explain what the Cairo Genizah is and how it's specifically related to the Ottoman period?
Yes, well, this is always a challenging topic to explain, so I'll divide my response into three parts. First, the concept of a Genizah in Judaism. Second, the Cairo Genizah's relationship to the Ben Ezra synagogue. And third, the difference between the medieval and Ottoman documents.
Mm-hmm.
So in Judaism, as in other religions, including Islam, there's the idea that you don't destroy paper or any kind of document or article that bears the name of God or allusions to him. And so for that reason, when you have a worn out document or a worn out prayer book, you don't just burn it, you don't tear it up. And most synagogues, even to this day, worldwide, have what's known as a genizah. The word means a burial. It's related to janazah in Arabic or janazeh in Turkish.
Mm-hmm.
And so what the actual genizah is usually a cupboard or closet in the synagogue, where today it's usually things like used prayer books are deposited, worn out materials related to worship. And then when the cupboard or closet gets full, the documents or the old prayer books are taken to a Jewish cemetery and buried in a specific portion of the cemetery reserved for what are called paper graves, which is exactly this kind of thing. So not every Jewish cemetery has such a section, but some of them do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the basic concept. Now, the Cairo Genizah is usually associated with the Ben Ezra synagogue, which is a very ancient synagogue. Okay, so the Ben Ezra synagogue, and you see a modern-day photo of it here, nicely restored, is located in Fustat, which today is a southern neighborhood in the enormous megalopolis that is modern Cairo. Originally, it was a little bit separated from the original city of Al-Qahira that the Fatimid Caliphate founded in 969. In the early 11th century, and all the dates are going to be AD or Common Era, I'll just point out. So in the early 11th century, this synagogue was reconstructed, and at that time, historians believed this special Genizah was added, this enormous storeroom. If you look at the outside, it would have encompassed this entire area, 2 stories high, the entire height of the synagogue. And that's where worn out papers, documents, books were deposited. The unusual thing, though, is that this Genizah was never emptied. It's kind of like a recycling bin that was never emptied. On the right, you see a kind of artistic representation of what it might have been like to put materials into the Genizah or take them out. And they were taken out mainly just to find blank paper to write on. Like if there were blank margins, they might be cut off. The original writing might be scraped off so that you could write over it. And
was that because paper was so
yes,
expensive and stuff?
Yes, particularly in the medieval period. Paper had not been in the Middle East very long. It was scarce. It was expensive. In the Ottoman period, this changes. So the entrance to the storeroom was on the second floor of the synagogue. So you would have been up here, and this is what it might have been like to put things in. So for something like 500 years, all kinds of things were deposited in this Genizah and never removed except for the purposes of finding writing paper. And they were all kinds of things, not just prayer books and the like, but rabbinical treatises, letters of great Jewish intellectuals, marriage contracts, copies of Muslim and Jewish court cases, merchant letters, charity lists, just everything you can imagine, all dumped in here. And then in approximately the 16th century, early 16th century, this chamber was sealed, closed up. The reason was almost certainly that by this time, Fustat was no longer the center of Jewish life in Greater Cairo.
Okay.
Largely because of destruction that had occurred during the Crusades and had caused all residents, not just Jews, to leave the neighborhood, not entirely, but to drift northeastward into the old Fatimid city. So the hub of Jewish life in Cairo now becomes the neighborhood of Harat Suwaila. And this is approximately where it was, up in the northeastern part of the old city. This map is not designed to be the last word in accuracy, by the way. It's designed to give an approximate sense of where things are. So fast forward, well, let me just say before that. So after this date, materials that might otherwise have been deposited in the Ben Ezra Synagogue Genizah were instead deposited in other synagogues or in Jewish cemeteries in Cairo and vicinity. So most of the later materials presumably come from those other sources.
Okay.
Fast forward to the 19th century, European scholars are beginning to hear about the Ben Ezra storeroom, and they're beginning to hear about the availability of what they called Hebrew manuscripts, not only from the Ben Ezra storeroom, but from other sources in the vicinity. Egypt is really opening up to European explorers and scholars of all kinds. And the big turning point comes in 1889 when Egypt is under British occupation and the Ben Ezra Synagogue goes through a major renovation. And at that point, this Genizah chamber is unsealed. And what ensues is a feeding frenzy, really. A very disorganized, competitive process of document grabbing on the part of these European and especially British intellectuals, antiquarians et al. They just go in and grab what they can. They don't do it all alone. Some of it is mediated by indigenous Jewish scholars, by antiquities dealers, etc. And this is how the documents of the Cairo Genizah are removed from Cairo. So they're not in Cairo today. They're are
dispersed all over the world, right?
Yes, mainly European and American collections, libraries of various kinds. The largest single collection is in Cambridge University Library, over half of the known documents.
Okay.
So that brings me to the difference between medieval and Ottoman era documents.
Yes, and maybe I should ask here, what drew you to this project and which became your latest book? You can talk about that as well if you want.
Okay, should I say something about the differences between medieval and Ottoman?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, to combine the two answers, as you know, my PhD is from Princeton University's Department of Near Eastern Studies. which then and now, I started there nearly 40 years ago. It's one of the major centers of Genizah scholarship in the world. And I actually went there to work on the Genizah, the medieval Genizah. So I was not going to be an historian of the Ottoman Empire. I was going to be a Genizahologist. But by the time I went there, I had gotten a master's degree at the University of Texas, and I had written an MA thesis on late 18th century Cairo. So part of me wanted to pursue the Ottoman trajectory, learn Turkish, or at least study it, find out more about the broader Ottoman context. But another part wanted to continue with the Genizah, and for the first year or so, I did both. But by the end of that first year, it was pretty clear that the Ottoman side had won out. The Ottoman-era documents, most of them, since the Genizah chamber was sealed in approximately the early 16th century, they would have come from elsewhere. Most of the documents in the Cairo Genizah come from this, what's often called the classical Genizah era, from the 10th through the 13th centuries, about 90%. There's something like 400,000 Genizah documents total, so that means that about 360,000, at a very rough estimate, are from this medieval period.
Okay.
For the late Mamluk and the Ottoman period, and that's from roughly the late 15th century up until the documents are removed in the 1890s, they're about 40,000, so only 10%. The range of languages is a little bit different. Most documents from any period are, I'm trying to advance the, yes, most documents from any period are going to be written in Judeo-Arabic. That's Arabic written in Hebrew letters. There are a number of documents from both periods also written in Arabic and Arabic script, such as this one, the first document in the book. Very, very difficult to read Arabic script, I should add, and Hebrew script. For the Ottoman period, you also see documents in Ladino, not a great many, but probably a few hundred.
Could you explain what Ladino is?
Yes, it is Spanish written in Hebrew script, and it reflects the influx into Ottoman territory, not just Egypt, but the entire empire, of Jews expelled from Spain and Portugal in the 1490s. And they really become a huge cultural force in Egypt and other Ottoman provinces. You also see, and this was something of a surprise to me, a small number of documents, we're talking maybe 100 total, in Ottoman Turkish. Copies of official documents, but other things as well. The thing about the Judeo-Arabic hands, the handwriting of the Ottoman-era documents, is that it tends to be written in this sort of Sephardic cursive, again reflecting this influx of Sephardic Jews into imperial territory. And the hands can be very, very hard to read. For a case in point, this first document from the University of Pennsylvania's Halper collection is a copy of a court case. It's in Arabic, which I think this was just a copy. It was not really meant to be read because it's incredibly difficult to read. Even the Arabic and Arabic script is difficult to read. But up in the top right-hand corner of the verso, the back side of the document, sideways, is a Judeo-Arabic filing note. This just tells the person who kept this document, probably Abraham Castro, what it contains. And this is not atypical. This is one of these Sephardic cursive hands. I could barely read it. I could make out Aulad Budair, the sons of Budair, on the first line. But other than that, I mean, if you can, reading Hebrew script, being able to read Hebrew is not enough to decipher one of these documents. Whereas with the medieval documents in Judeo-Arabic, if you know Hebrew script, you have a decent chance of being able to decipher a document, particularly a court document written by a professional scribe, but not with the Ottoman-era stuff. And so that's one reason I decided to work on Arabic documents in Arabic script, both in Arabic and Ottoman Turkish. Another problem with the Genizah documents, both Ottoman and medieval, is that, remember, these are worn-out documents. And they've been either sitting in a chamber for hundreds of years or buried. So you have problems with documents like this one that are torn, that are stained, that have faded ink, etc. So there are some distinctive challenges to this corpus.
Mm-hmm.
And now getting back to how I got into the book, I mean, I could go through the whole process of researching and writing it, or that might be too tedious.
I mean, if you want to tie it to what I'm going to say, talk about next, we can do that. So I was wondering, so you're coming to these documents as an like historian of the Ottoman Empire, not specifically as a Genizah specialist, right? So what do you think, like what kind of a vantage point does that give you? Which would let you see what others might miss, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, that's key, I think, because I'm not really a Jewish studies person.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that standpoint, I'm at a disadvantage to people like my Israeli colleague, Dotan Arad, who I think, and I've said in several different fora, that I think he's the world's leading expert on the Ottoman-Era documents.
You mentioned him in the book.
Yes, he was tremendously helpful, very supportive, gave me a lot of tips about documents, and he can read these horrible Judeo-Arabic hands from the later period, as well as Hebrew and Arabic. What I bring to the table is the Ottoman background, as you implied. I spent most of my career working on Ottoman Egypt, and so I know the administrative and institutional superstructure within which these documents are produced. And since I'm working on documents in Arabic script, there are going to be more documents of an official character, like Muslim court case summaries, petitions to officials, government decrees, than there would be with Judeo-Arabic or Hebrew script of any kind. So what it enables me to do is to recognize when these documents are alluding to various officials and grandees in Ottoman Egypt. Allusions and references that I wouldn't necessarily be able to catch if I did not have this background. A case in point, and I don't have an image of this document, but Chapter 3, Document 4, which is a document from the Alliance Israélite Universelle in Paris that concerns payment of a debt in 1649 from a military officer in one of Egypt's regiments to one of the governor's Jewish bankers. And he owes him not only cash, but also a large amount of sugar. So it looks at first as if it's just a straightforward debt repayment. But then when you realize who these people are, and I was astonished because I knew who most of them were from my previous research. They appear in chronicles. Evliya Çelebi mentions a few of them. And then there's this official called the Vekilharç, who's present. His name is Mustafa the Vekilharç. And
do you mind explaining what he does? Vekilharç does?
Yes, exactly. He was the official. He was always a former member of one of Egypt's elite regiments, the Çavuş Regiment, and he was appointed by the palace in Istanbul to procure these luxury goods: rice, sugar, livestock, flax, that Egypt sent to Istanbul every year. As tribute. It was called the Mal-Emiri. So this whole debt repayment is taking place. It looks like a one-on-one private debt repayment, but it's taking place under the overarching superstructure of the Vekilharç collecting the sugar that goes to the palace every year. It was very much locked into that process. And if I had not known what the Vekilharç was, and what it implied for him to be present here. And if I had not known about all the connections that the document reveals, I would have been able to figure out that it was a debt repayment, that it involved sugar coming from several different places in the Nile Delta, but I would not have seen this overarching institutional structure. So the takeaway there is that if potential Genizah scholars believe that the Genizah documents are entirely bottom-up documents that have no relation to the administrative superstructure, they need to think again, because they do.
That's true. That's true. And there are many interesting figures that shows up in the documents. When I was going through your book, that's what kind of came to mind. So there's, for example, Salmūn al-Iskandarānī, who is the customs director at Alexandria, and then there is Abraham Castro. You mentioned him, right? Just a couple of minutes ago, who flees to Istanbul to warn Suleiman I about the governor of Egypt's rebellion, right?
Yes.
Do you want to talk about any of these figures, like one or two, that strikes you as interesting or important in the documents?
Yeah, I can speak about both Castro and Salmūn. They're both powerful customs directors of Alexandria, and as you mentioned, Castro probably ended up keeping this document because it concerns a debt repayment to him through his son. So he was director of Egypt's mint from very early after the Ottoman conquest in 1517 until he left for Jerusalem sometime in the 1530s. He was also director of Alexandria's customs from about 1520 until about 1532. He probably was one of these refugees from Spain, or at least he came from a family that had come from Spain, hence Castro. And I knew him mainly for what you just described, that he was director of the mint when Ahmed Pasha, the governor of Egypt, rebelled against Suleiman, and Castro fled to Istanbul to warn the Sultan of this rebellion. Once the rebellion was crushed, Suleiman allowed Castro to become more powerful than he'd ever been. There were those Venetian merchants in particular who believed that Castro was essentially running Egypt all by himself. And they actually complained to Suleiman in 1532 that he was favoring merchants from other countries over them, and that led to his being removed as customs director of Alexandria. But that didn't stop him from trying to put family members into customs both in Alexandria and elsewhere. I should add that he's fairly well researched by the Israeli scholar Avraham David, by the American scholar Benjamin Arbel, and now by the French scholar Benjamin Lelouch. So in addition, I mentioned the mint and Alexandria. He also put family members into customs-related positions. He had his brother serving as a kind of guarantor for him in Alexandria. And this document that I just moved away from involves his son Joseph, or Yusuf, who was running the customs at Damietta, the other big Mediterranean port, Egypt's other big Mediterranean port after Alexandria and Rosetta. The document itself details that the people repaying the debt are these two Muslim brothers who apparently rent a boat from Joseph Castro, the customs director in Damietta, so that they can fish. It doesn't mention fishing specifically, but they're operating not in the Mediterranean, but in Lake Manzala, this lake right next to Damietta that feeds into the Nile. So probably fishing and maybe transporting goods across the lake. And it's not only the boat, but a considerable sum of money that they owe to Joseph Castro. But on the verso, this side of the document, in this part, take my word for it because it's illegible, it becomes clear that Joseph is acting only as a proxy for his father. The case makes it very clear that the debt is to be repaid to Abraham through an agent of his who was on the spot in Damietta. Abraham, by this time, is almost certainly in Jerusalem. That's sort of his retirement location. And the weird thing about his son Joseph is that he's not known from any other source. We know that Abraham Castro had two other sons, Moses and Jacob. Jacob was a great scholar, but nobody knew about Joseph. And there's something like almost a contempt for him that comes through in this document. Like the court case states repeatedly, Joseph does not get the repayment, it goes to Abraham. I wondered if he might be illegitimate. I mean, who knows? Or some kind of, the black sheep, the ne'er-do-well son. You just stick him in Damietta and hope that he doesn't screw up. I mean, I'm reading that into this document.
Okay.
But I guess the takeaway is that Abraham Castro really hangs over this document, even though he's not physically present in Damietta, and his son is supposedly running the customs. Okay. He is a known figure from other sources. Salmūn al-Iskandarānī, though, is not known from other sources. He's mentioned in other Genizah documents and documents from another synagogue in Cairo. At least we think it's the same person. And he was director of the Alexandria customs several decades later, probably in the early 17th century, around 1620. And he seems to be, based on these four documents I have concerning him, extremely powerful. There are four documents, all in Ottoman Turkish. The first one has what seems to be a member of the imperial soldiery writing to him and almost begging him not to think that he spoke ill of him. So this is some kind of agent of his who seems to be operating largely in Istanbul. So this is one clue to how linked in Salmūn must have been. He was kind of like a latter-day Abraham Castro. The second document is someone telling him that a fellow Alexandrian is coming through Alexandria, and he wants him to be nice to this person, probably meaning...
Sorry, so... He is in which century? I forgot.
Seemingly early 17th, because his seal, or the seal of the person writing to him in the second document, has a date on it, which is 1030. That's the Islamic date, so this would be 1621 AD.
So, and Castro is early...
About
not early, but mid-16th century, sorry.
Right, about 100 years earlier. He died in approximately 1560 and was active. He was already in place, more or less, when the Ottomans conquered Egypt in 1517, so far as we know.
Yeah, please go on.
Yeah, so, Salmūn, if you're coming to Alexandria and you want to be linked in and to have your customs fees for anything you're trying to ship through reduced, Salmūn is your contact person. That's the message of this second letter. And the third is actually a petition from Salmūn himself. It's written by a professional scribe in Ottoman Turkish, so it's like all these petitions. It's extremely obsequious and fawning. The language is way over the top. It's probably to the governor of Egypt. And it's complaining about these sub-provincial officials known as kashifs. The word literally means an investigator or inspector. The office originated under the Mamluk Sultanate as someone who inspected and repaired the irrigation works in Egypt's sub-provinces. Under the Ottomans, it becomes sort of a title for a minor sub-provincial governor. You can see from the map, Alexandria is right on the border of Buhaira sub-province. And the Kashif of Buhaira actually came into Alexandria once a year with 300 oxen, Ebliya Çelebi describes this, to turn the water wheels in the city and fill the wells. This was where Alexandria got all of its fresh water because, unlike Damietta, it did not have a direct link to the Nile. So there's a dependency on the Kashif, this particular Kashif, but Salmūn is complaining about what he calls the Kashif's men. and it could be the Buhaira Kashif, it could be any of these Kashifs from the surrounding sub-provinces who interfere with the Mali Miri, these luxury provisions, rice, flax, sugar, livestock, usually sheep, that he's trying to assemble, because the customs directors of these two ports are in charge of assembling all the stuff that comes from throughout Egypt to go to Istanbul every year and getting it out through the port. And so he's got these rogue soldiers just coming in, and they either steal it, or when they can't steal it, he says they damage it, which could mean killing sheep, throwing flax in the water, throwing sugar in the water, who knows? So
damaging his livelihood, basically.
Yes, his livelihood, and threatening his link to the palace. He wants Istanbul to think that he's being a good servant. So that's Salmūn as the Sultan's faithful servant. But then the fourth document, which Cambridge University Libraries had just cataloged this document, and the librarian Ben Outhwaite, who's now the head of Cambridge's Genizah Research Unit, sent me a visual of it. It's actually someone complaining about a new Jewish tax farmer, complaining about Salmūn and what he's done, not in Alexandria, but in this village near Alexandria, whose taxes he farms. And what he's complaining about is that Salmūn is illegally subleasing part of the revenue package to someone else, to another Jewish merchant. If you farm taxes, you're essentially buying the right to collect a certain package of revenues, like from this village. And he's taking particular chunks of the revenue for sugar cane and something else, seed or grain. It's tohum in Turkish.
Yeah.
Which means seed today, but can also mean grain. And essentially selling the rights to somebody else. And this new tax farmer of the village comes in and says, you need to investigate these people because what they're doing is not right. So Salmūn is definitely a wheeler dealer. He's very wealthy. He has a lot of irons in the fire, as the saying goes. He's got connections to Istanbul. He runs the customs. He's responsible for assembling the tribute, but he's also he has his own network of clients to whom he thinks he can sell or sublease these tax collection rights. So there's this whole interesting network of economic and political connections that he embodies. And it's kind of like building on what was the case a century earlier with Abraham Castro.
And you said we haven't met him before in any archival records, right, Salmūn?
No, except other Genizah documents and documents from another synagogue, unless he might pop up in a chronicle somewhere. Evliya doesn't mention him. It's a bit earlier for Evliya to mention. So there are not many early 17th century chronicles of Egypt, but the ones I've seen don't mention him. He's not mentioned in Ottoman court chronicles. One of these kashifs, though, is mentioned, but I won't get into that.
Okay. Another point that kind of attracted I was interested in was we see that over the period that your book covers, we see that the leadership of Egypt's Jewish community life or Jewish community undergoes a transformation almost. So from rabbis to more wealthy merchants and bankers. So do we know what's driving this, and how visible is this change in the documents themselves?
There's no one document that deals specifically with this, but you can see it happening. The head of the Jewish community in Egypt is called Rais al-Yahud in Arabic, Nagid in Hebrew. And one of my professors at Princeton, Mark Cohen, actually, his first book back in 1980 was a history of the origins of this office. It began in the 11th century and kind of gradually consolidated itself as an institution. The Ottomans, after they conquer Egypt, put an end to the office, which might seem cataclysmic and it might seem punitive, but it really is not. My take on it is that it's recognizing a development that was already occurring under the late Mamluk Sultanate, and that has a lot to do with two things, one of which is the influx of Sephardic Jews and their descendants into Egypt. So Egypt, like other Ottoman provinces, ends up with this fairly large population of Sephardic merchants who belong to several different synagogues, who even compete with each other and with the Arabic-speaking Jews. And so really no one leader can supervise that increasingly diverse community. This was already apparent with the last few holders of the office in the late Mamluk period. And the documents, one of the earlier documents in the book, has something to do with one of these leaders, a man named Nathan or Yonatan Sholal, or Sholel. He was a second to last Reis al-Yahud. He was a merchant. He was director of the mint. Or rather, he wasn't, but his nephew who succeeded him was. So kind of a precursor to Abraham Castro. And already you can see him delegating authority. He gives supervision over Jewish pious endowments to two other Jewish merchants. So I think what was happening was that the Ottomans simply recognized a fait accompli. The other thing that was influencing this, one of the early Reis al-Yahuds was the great Jewish philosopher Maimonides in the late 12th and first half of the 13th centuries. And he more or less founded a dynasty that continued to hold this office until 1375. And then the last Maimonidean descendant fled Egypt for Syria, probably because of some internal Jewish community dispute. He eventually comes back and resumes the office until he died in about 1415. But he's the last Maimonidean Reis al-Yahud. And there's no question that his exile weakened the office. So there are things that happen in the 15th century that are setting up this abolition. And the leadership of the community goes to these Sephardic merchant elites who had already held the last holders of the office of Reis al-Yahud in the late Mamluk period. So Abraham Castro is sometimes called Nagid in Hebrew sources, even though he did not formally hold that office, which shows you the continuity between these two periods, even though the office has been abolished.
Okay. And the other, main or big topic in the documents is trade, especially trade moving through Damietta and Alexandria, for example, sugar bound for Istanbul. Could you tell us about what does commercial world look like, which is revealed in the documents?
Right. Well, I've said something about it with regard to the Mali Miri, the tribute that the customs directors have to assemble. Alexandria and Damietta, and also Rosetta, Alexandria's sister port, really link Egypt to the rest of the Ottoman Empire, not just Istanbul, but also Greater Syria, which was mainly served by Damietta, and North Africa, the North African provinces, plus Morocco, although there was also an overland caravan trade. And then Alexandria links Egypt to Europe in a big way. With this trade through the Mediterranean, you can really see the Ottoman agenda for these Mediterranean ports. Damietta in particular had really suffered in the medieval period. It was attacked repeatedly by the Crusaders, and the early Mamluk sultanates decided to essentially tear it down and rebuild it inland. So it never really recovered its status as a major port until the Ottoman period. And you can see governors of Egypt, grandees, even chief harem eunuchs, commissioning commercial infrastructure, both in the ports, the Mediterranean ports, and in Cairo and along the Nile leading up to them to facilitate this trade. The sugar that I mentioned, that was the subject of that one document, Chapter 3, Document 4, was collected from various sugar villages, essentially in the Nile Delta, by the Vekilharç and then moved up probably to, well, either one of these ports, Alexandria, let's say, for shipment to Istanbul. So for that kind of thing, you have to have warehouses throughout the vicinity, and you have to have officials, whether it's kashifs or merchants or whoever, who can move these commodities. Meanwhile, in Cairo itself, and this is the map of Cairo from the book, and I'll just point out that it's kind of sideways so that north is to the left. Cairo had a northern and a southern port, Bulak, which today is just part of Cairo proper, but at the time was its separate town a little bit north. And then the riverfront part of Fustat is often called Misr al-Qadima, or ancient Egypt, and that's the southern port. Anything that comes into Egypt through the Mediterranean ports and goes down the Nile to Cairo is going to come into the city through Bulak. So things like firewood, which routinely was supplied from Anatolia. There's one document that describes firewood coming to the Mevlevi Tekke, the lodge of the Mevlevi Sufis, which is right here, not far from the citadel. So Bulak really becomes an important port to link Cairo more securely with the Mediterranean ports. And then the Misr al-Qadima port really links Cairo with Upper Egypt. So anything coming in from farther south or going out. There's one document in chapter 3, which is the commercial transactions chapter. Document 3, it's a very short note in Arabic describing a shipment of sheep coming into Misr al-Qadima, almost certainly from Upper Egypt. And what you see during the Ottoman period in general is that in the same way that the Mediterranean ports are more firmly linked to Cairo and to other parts of the Ottoman Empire, Upper Egypt is more securely linked to Cairo and the Delta than it was during the Mamluk period. And this is true not only for commercial goods, but also for population movement. You start to see scholars, ulama, coming in from Upper Egypt to go to the great Al-Azhar mosque / seminary. I'm just looking at other points I have too.
Sure.
The documents also show us that Egypt is becoming increasingly linked not just to other parts of the Ottoman Empire commercially, but also to regions outside the empire. And one of the more important ones that I think is undertreated in secondary scholarship is south of Egypt and Sudan.
Okay.
That brings me to the next slide. There's one document, chapter 3 document. Sorry, I'm losing the place in my notes.
Take it.
Chapter 3, document 5, describes a kind of commercial exchange of coral, which would have come from the Western Mediterranean, possibly near Italy or near Algeria, which at the time was an Ottoman province. So coral in exchange for gum arabic from Sudan.
Okay.
And gum arabic comes from the sap of a particular acacia tree, Acacia senegal. And you can see it just, I don't think you even have to tap it. It just kind of oozes out of the bark. Today, as you see from this image of products the many products, very few of them good for you at all, that contain gum arabic, it's mainly used today in the food and beverage industry. So if you've ever eaten M&Ms or drunk a Coke, you've imbibed gum arabic. In the pre-modern period, it was usually used mainly in the textile industry. It was used to thicken dyes, to thicken inks, stuff like that. So not nearly as large a trade, but still substantial. And the thing is, most of the trees grow in Sudan or across this kind of belt, as you might imagine from the name, going out to Senegal. This is a map of, the gum arabic in question is called Sanari gum arabic. equating it with the town of Sennar, which at the time was the capital of the Funj Sultanate, again, undertreated in works on Ottoman Egypt. It was a political entity that ran Sudan from 1501 until 1821, when the autonomous governor of Egypt, Mehmed Ali Pasha, sent his son in to conquer it, which he did. He also founded the city of Khartoum in the process. And Sennar, in its time, was known as a hub of the caravan trade, mainly, unfortunately, in enslaved people. But gum arabic would have been traded along with other commodities on these same caravans. This, by the way, is an old map, so it doesn't show the country of South Sudan, which today is an independent country, so I added the label. What's unsettling about this map is that it kind of unwittingly shows the trajectory of Sudan's civil war as well.
That's true. That's true.
And gum arabic is playing a role in the civil war. I read something recently that the paramilitary force, the Rapid Support Forces, is paying some of their soldiers, apparently, in gum arabic.
Oh, wow.
Because the trees are in a zone controlled by the RSF.
I see.
And presumably the idea is they would resell the gum arabic. But so it's odd how these commodities still play a role hundreds of years later.
Yeah, that's true. That's true, yeah.
So my broader point was this links Egypt to Sudan commercially. There's also quite a link, and we know about this from other sources, of course, to North Africa, although it doesn't really come through all that forcefully in the documents. I know it's there. The coral mentioned in this same document might have come from Ottoman Algiers. We don't know, but somewhere in the Western Mediterranean. In this extremely hard to read document, The Debt to Abraham Castro, the guy who ends up with the boat is an associate of Castro's called Suleiman al-Jarbali, which almost certainly refers to Jerba, an island off of Tunisia. So he may have been from Tunisia. We don't know.
Okay.
There's also a marriage contract that probably does not come from Egypt at all. It's probably one of those documents from somewhere else, maybe Morocco, maybe Tunis, Algiers, that somehow was scooped up by one of these 19th century collectors and added to the Genizah.
I see. Okay. So that's the larger commercial world in the documents.
Yes.
That's fascinating, to be honest. And beyond the Jewish community, what can these documents tell us about Ottoman Egypt in more general terms as a whole, basically?
A number of things. I've mentioned continuities with the Mamluk Sultanate, and here I mean real continuities, not the myth that the Mamluk system continued under a thin Ottoman veneer, which we know was not the case. But things like the abolition of the office of head of the Jews resulting from late Mamluk era developments. The legal culture. I mean, one of the things that helped me to find a way into this document was that in its format, it's consistent with late Mamluk documents. The late Donald Little, a Canadian scholar, had worked on documents from the Haram al-Sharif archive in Jerusalem. They're mainly 14th century. And the same thing, this is like a phrase describing the judge, the seals, the fact that the case is laid out on the recto and then on this side, the verso. This is how the debt was paid off, more detail about the boat, and then the final disposition on the right side and the filing note. And the signatures are squeezed in right at the bottom. In format terms, this continues. It changes in the 17th century. You start to see just slightly different start to the document. You don't have this elaborate alama, as it's called. You just have a much sparser Arabic phrase. But the continuity of the format is remarkable. legal documents in any culture are going to retain these older features, certainly in English legal documents and American documents as well. I mean, British documents. You see these antiquated sayings that go back to the Renaissance, for example, and they're still being used just because nothing ever changes in legal culture except very gradually. Another thing is that the Ottomans, when they conquered Egypt, had to deal with the Bedouin tribes who had amassed influence under the Mamluks. And there are two documents in Chapter 3, Documents 1 and 2, that they don't really demonstrate overtly the fate of one of these tribes, but they allude to it. It's a tribe known as the Banu Baghdad, or a population, a clan, a family. And despite the name, they don't have any connection I know of to Baghdad itself. It's just the name. Under the Mamluks, they ran this sub-province, Menufia, in the Nile Delta. And right around the time that the Ottomans were getting ready to conquer Egypt, they expanded into Garbia. The reason is money. These were two revenue-heavy provinces for both the Mamluks and the Ottomans, and they wanted the right to collect taxes. So the first document is going on and on about a village that Muhammad ibn Baghdad, to which he holds the tax farm, and one of his agents in that village. But in the next document, a Jewish merchant is complaining about having to sell Ibn Baghdad's textiles in the Khan al-Khalili, Cairo's great covered bazaar, which is located here. And what's happened in the interim is that Muhammad ibn Baghdad has been executed. And in fact, Suleiman the Magnificent summarily executed the Banu Baghdad's leadership. Somehow they had gotten on his bad side. But I think it's more than just an isolated incident. What you can see the Ottomans doing is trying to bring in these kashifs, these sub-provincial governors, to displace the Bedouin tribal chieftains who had formerly held sway in the Delta. They managed to do this in the Nile Delta to a certain extent, although there are Bedouin populations they patronize. In Upper Egypt, it's more a matter of playing. There are kashifs, but it's more a matter of playing one Bedouin population off against another. So again, they're continuing a strategy put in place by the Mamluks, but to see this essentially wholesale execution of the leadership of this family is pretty astonishing. And I found out what had happened to them by getting access to a little-known Arabic chronicle. Otherwise, I would have been wondering why Ibn Baghdad's textiles are being sold in the Khan al-Khalili.
One question I had was in chapter 5, I believe, there are like documents entirely like about Muslims, right? There's like a primer on Islamic practice, there's Sufi poetry. I mean, people may wonder what are those doing in a quote unquote like Jewish archive.
Yes, I wondered that myself. Chapter 5 is called Documents from the Muslim Community ? Because of the 6 documents, and some of them are like the primer on Islam, are really 2 documents that make up one text. They don't really have anything overtly to do with Jews. That brings me to another development that the documents seem to reflect, and that's conversion to Islam on the one hand and the prevalence of Sufism on the other. The primer, or the work of Il-Mihal, which you see here, it's a pristine document, and it's 4 or 5 different folios that were meant to be folded together as a small book. And as you say, it's a primer on Islam. That is a genre that is known. It becomes wildly popular in the 16th century throughout the Ottoman Empire. But ordinarily, works of Il-Mihal they're not just primers, but they're also a chance for the author or compiler to show off his knowledge. So you have lots of discussion of what theological greats of the past said about particular issues. There's none of this in this little booklet. It's all very basic. Most of it is concerned with prayer, how to pray, or more specifically, the many, many, many mistakes you can make during one of the 5 daily prayers that will invalidate.
And the language is pretty simple too, right, Mojam?
Yes, you can see it's really laid out, fully voweled, little rosettes separating every word, so that if you're reading it aloud to a group, you can see exactly how to pronounce it. It's pretty simple language. The scribe has underlined the word invalid, sehev. So it's like, if you do this, your prayer is invalid. If you do this, your prayer is invalid. And we know that works of Ilmihal were sometimes used by converts.
Okay.
We can't tell that. I mean, one suspicion would be that this made its way into the Genizah because it was used by a Jewish convert to Islam. We have no idea, though. It makes sense, the simplicity of the language, the fact that there's no throat clearing, no discussion of theological principles, just the basics. And it's written it's put on the page in a format that would lend itself to being read to a group, maybe by one literate person, one person who could read Ottoman Turkish, to a group who maybe was not that familiar with it.
Communal characteristic of reading in early modern period is pretty important too, I think. So
yes, it was normal to read in a group. What would have been abnormal would be for one person, like a geek, to take this into a little room and just pore over it all by himself. This is.
Sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, this is something that you could even conceivably take to prayer with you, so that you could be kind of cheating, as it were, while you were praying.
That's true.
So
and
this
the document on the right.
Yes, this is again one of the stranger documents I found, or was alerted to anyway, by Marina Rusto and her team at the Princeton Genizah Project. It's actually, this is the recto of the document. The verso is blank except for these same 2 columns. So and it consists of 3 Sufi poems in Ottoman Turkish.
Okay.
The fact that the verso has these columns leads you to suspect that the scribe expected to add more poetry. So it's probably part of what is known as a junk, which is like an informal collection of quote-unquote folk poetry meant to be circulated by hand and perhaps read aloud to a group. Now, 2 of these poems, you can see these little red rubrics. 2 of these poems are attributed to a poet called Ashik Ömer, who is known. He was a saz poet, one of these poets who recited verse to the accompaniment of a saz, a long-necked stringed instrument, while wandering around. There's quite a big literature on him. He died in 1707. He was born sometime in the early to mid-17th century, probably in central Anatolia. There's some debate over his origins. But his divan has been published in Turkish. There are about 1,500 poems in it, as well as other poems that appeared in various junks, probably not unlike this one. These 2 poems I could not find in the divan or in any of the publications from the junks. So does that mean he didn't really write them? They are fairly consistent with his style.
Okay.
I don't know. Someone could have been trying to mimic his style. It seems kind of unlikely to me that unknown poems by the real Ashik Ömer would pop up in the Genizah, but I suppose stranger things have happened.
That's true.
And they talk about, the first poem in particular talks about the importance of finding a mystical guide, not necessarily joining a Sufi order, but following a mystical guide. Now, the 3rd poem is by someone named Yahya Çavuş. Çavuş is a military rank. I would say this is probably a janissary, although he could be a member of the Çavuş regiment. And the strange thing about this poem is it's Melami, essentially. It reflects the Melami Sufi tendency. And here's where I should give a shout out to my former Ohio State colleague, Victoria Holbrook, and her colleague, Mujahid Kachar from Istanbul University, who were instrumental in helping me transcribe and translate this document. I mean, unlike the Debt to Abraham Castro, this is very legible script, but it is written, it's poetry. And I never really worked on Ottoman poetry. So it's very, the language is quite poetic, and translating it was a challenge.
Makes sense.
Ashik Umar's language is, I would say, at a much higher register than Yahya Chavush's. Yahya Chavush's language is pretty easy to decipher, or straightforward, I should say, not easy. But it's Melami in that the Melami Sufi tendency, which was a recognizable Sufi order for part of the Ottoman period, it's very self-effacing in the extreme. You might be a Melami and also belong to a more mainstream order like the Halbatis or the Mevlevis. But you yourself would not be looking to make overt displays of your own spirituality. So you probably would not participate in the group mystical exercise, dhikr or sama. Your friends wouldn't know that you were a Melami. And the poetry, Yahya Chavush's poem also just constantly asks for blessings on the very people who condemn and ridicule him. It's like, may they get what they want in life, may I not get what I want. May they be the respected people, may I be ridiculed and humiliated. If he is a Janissary, this is not what you would expect to find in a Janissary. I mean, Janissaries, they did tend to join Sufi orders, the Bektashis most famously in Egypt, often the Halbatis, but they tended to be drawn to orders that provided a group activity. And I mean, Yahya Chavush might have belonged to one of these more mainstream orders as well, but to find Melami poetry written by what appears to be a Janissary officer is a surprise. And how did it come into the Genizah?
Yeah, that's my question. Yeah, that was a good question, yeah.
It could be that, I mean, the Janissaries, not only in Egypt, but in other provinces, tended to have economic connections to Jewish merchants. It could have been a Jewish scribe who wrote this down. Yahya Chavush might possibly have been a Jewish convert, although I somehow doubt it. Or two more possibilities. One is that the Ben Ezra Genizah or some other Genizah was used as a repository by non-Jews as well.
I see. Okay, I see.
And a fourth, and maybe the most likely one, is that this is one of those documents that just got scooped up by one of these collectors. And it doesn't really come from a Jewish context at all.
Yeah, I see. Okay. So the exact answer we cannot really tell, but we can speculate.
Yes, there are many possibilities. If you're wondering about the perforations on the side, by the way, these come from the collection. At some point, the Alkan Nathan Adler collection at JTS thought that it would be a good idea to perforate the documents so they could be bound, I suppose, which no one would do today.
Yeah, that's true. So I'll wrap up. And I'll wrap up by saying, so what do you want the readers of your book to take? What do you most want them to take away from the book, basically? And since the book is open access, who do you hope that it, pick it up?
Okay, before I get to that, I should give a shout out to the two research assistants, as I guess that's the best title for them. As I was finishing my transcriptions and translations, I enlisted the services of two young scholars, Alan Elbaum, who's connected with the Princeton Genizah Project, who proofread my Arabic transcriptions and translations, and my final PhD student, Christopher Whitehead, who proofread my Ottoman Turkish transcriptions and translations. They were immensely helpful. They saved me from many, many embarrassing mistakes, and they're on the title page of this book, and deservedly so. And the other person I should thank is, whom I've mentioned in passing, is Marina Rusto, the director of the Princeton Genizah Project, for being incredibly supportive, and her team, including Alan Albaum, would alert me to documents that they thought I might be interested in. Okay. So that was an immense help. What I would like people to take away from this, I think for Ottomanists, the Genizah potentially is a supplemental source. It fills out, and I would say complicates the information that can be gleaned from more conventional sources, Ottoman archival documents, Egyptian or provincial archival documents, chronicles. For the Ottoman period, there are archival documents, which there really are not for the previous periods, with a few exceptions. So it's really supplementary. I think for Jewish studies scholars, I'm hoping my book will give us a clearer sense of the Ottoman superstructure and the late Mamluk superstructure, because if I can pinpoint a weakness, it's very presumptuous of me to identify weaknesses in previous Genizah scholarship. And for the medieval period, it's not really an issue so far as I can tell. But because this is a relatively new field, quite new, that is research on the Ottoman-Era Genizah, the people who are best at deciphering documents are not really experts on the Ottoman Empire.
I see.
So one thing is providing a bit of background, but also making a plea for collaboration. I think probably no one person can combine the necessary depth of knowledge in both Ottoman history and Jewish studies. So
that's true.
Marina Rusto likes to say it takes a village to read a Genizah document, and for the Ottoman period, that's really true.
That's true. Hocam, thank you very much. This has been immensely fun and immensely informative. Do you want to add anything else before we wrap up?
I can't think of anything. I think we're both exhausted on this hot summer day.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Thank you very much, Hocam, for appearing on the show, and thank you to the audience as well for tuning in and listening and watching. And I will see you in another episode of the Ottoman Encounters interview series soon, hopefully. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dora.